Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 49th episode of TechLifeSkills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Thank you so much for joining us today, and let's dive into what we're talking about today with actually a couple of what I would say complex questions. Let's just say I were to ask you something like, what are the pros and cons of using self-driving cars? Or if I were to ask you, what's the effect of social media on people's mental health? Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing, right? What are the pros and cons? You could probably come up with some key points to help me understand the nature of these topics better by using a resource like Google, for example. So you could Google, you could find information, you could summarize into some key points for me. Now, what I think is just absolutely incredible is that today we have the technology we now have the technology to go ahead and automatically generate debate speeches, for example, just based off of these sorts of topics. But the thing is, as humans, we have resources like Google from which we can go ahead and search up for different information. But then for computers, for artificial intelligence systems, as we like to call them, how can they find this kind of information? How can they extract this data and then help us find insights from within it? Well, that's exactly what we're here to talk about today. And so, as a developer, what kind of infrastructure can you actually use to back your AI-powered applications? So, to help us understand this, we are being joined today by a very special guest, the founder, CEO, and lead technologist of WebHost.io, Geva, a company that specializes in enabling developers to tap into web content at scale. And so, without any further ado, I'd now love to welcome Ran to the show. Hi, Ran, how are you?
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course,
Thank
glad to have you on the show.
you.
Thank you. And so now diving right into the world of data and AI and what it is that you're passionate about, I would like to start off by just knowing a little bit more about you and how you got to working for or working with really creating this whole WebHose organization and doing all this really interesting work around data.
Thank you. Well, things that one thing linked to another. I'm originally a developer,
Hmm.
self-taught developer, and so I know made along my career multiple programs and eventually start a company in the brand monitoring field,
Hmm.
mainly in Israel eventually. And we want to go global. And we tried multiple applications, and one of them was monitoring PR and to provide a client a way of knowing how well the PR did.
Hmm.
So we created a whole sophisticated algorithm that takes a PR and analyzes its structure and the topic and the events and want to see if we can find verbatim PRs versus actual pieces of articles that real human wrote about the press release
Hmm.
and where they were published and how well did they do. And so we developed a whole sophisticated algorithm and a very, very cool UI with three scores, go to one score, which was amazing, very beautiful. However, we didn't get any clients. And the reason was that people who tried it, the feedback was that we didn't find all the results. So how can you give me a good score if you missed this and that mention?
Hmm.
And how did they know that? They searched Google. And we're a small company, and I developed the whole thing basically. We relied on the company's crawlers, the core technology, which was good, but it came nothing close to Google ability to crawl the web.
Yeah.
And I did try Bing, and I did try Yahoo, and I did try multiple applications that provide an API to access the web,
Hmm.
but nothing came close to Google, and I couldn't get the whole text to analyze.
Hmm.
Uh, so I thought to myself, there must be a better way. If only Google would open their index, because they are already crawling the web.
Yeah.
It would be amazing for us to get access to this data and to create cool applications on top of it. Um, but obviously, I couldn't do come close to that. But then I realized that I really need to focus on something to do it well.
Hmm.
So if I'll build a company that focuses only on content collection and create a way of leveling the playing field and provide an API so everyone can have access
Hmm.
to web content at scale. That would probably solve the same problem that I had. If I had,
Hmm.
I guess some would have the same problem, and that's where we started. And we spun off and took the main technology that was developed since '07. We started developing. We started for message boards initially, and then added news and blogs. We focused only on that. Started 3 people, uh, and well, my co-founder, which is was in charge for the product and marketing, and myself and another developer, and then we hired another developer and started working everyone, including myself, only on crawling the web and
Hmm.
providing an interface and structuring service that will enable easy access. And behold, we got clients. So we uh, um, we we found a niche that or a pain that people really reacted and wanted was quite quick. The other product failed for a year. We didn't find one client.
Hmm.
So getting a lot of clients right away means that you found something meaningful. So now we're about 44 people. So we're growing.
Very nice.
And we're bootstrapped. So we're growing out of value. The more clients we get, the bigger we get. And that's our aim to provide the value, and we take only the money that we earn to keep in developing the product. So we're very focused on providing product or features that will bring value to our clients.
Hmm. It's very, very interesting to hear. And, specifically the part of this journey that really stands out to me is the part where you said you saw that problem as a developer, where you didn't have access to web data, and that annoyed you enough to say, you know what, there should be a solution to this problem. That's what's so
Yeah,
amazing about technology, right? Is that as a developer, you can say, this doesn't exist, that's a problem, I'm going to create it. And, that's how WebHost was born. And I gotta say, tapping into web data has always been a challenge. So, there's been many projects that I work on. I mean, pretty much everyone joining today, if you've seen any of my content before, I really love natural language processing. And as a matter of fact, one of my first, projects using machine learning in general used IBM Watson for natural language question answering. It was called Ask Tanmay. And it was built, I did this back in like 2015. And I remember back in 2015, when I was actually figuring out how am I going to get data to feed Ask Tanmay, do I just scrape Google results? Well, that's not exactly legal. What's the best way of doing it? And I had stumbled upon WebHose and signed up for it with my Gmail account, and now it was actually pretty funny because I'd forgotten that I had used WebHose back then, and a little while ago, Ran and I were revisiting that account, and it was kind of surprising that I was able to have a Gmail account because you can't sign up for WebHose with Gmail anymore. So, historic 6-year-old account with WebHose back from that first project. So yeah, there have been so many more on the way too, right? Where the sort of bottleneck becomes access to web data. And there's all these different companies with access to these indices of the web, but then at that point, that's something that only they can access. And so as a developer, being able to access the web to do analysis opens up so many amazing possibilities. And as a matter of fact, actually diving a little bit deeper into this problem that you solved, could you maybe tell us a little bit more about exactly what kind of service WebHouse actually provides and how it would be different from just like a scraping tool or like a crawling service, right? Because those exist. And as a matter of fact, I've hand rolled some crawling services before for custom data. But what does WebHose provide that's different for me as a developer?
yeah. So also initially when we start a company, if a client would come and want access to data from one single, two, three, 10 websites, it would probably be better or easier for him and even more cost effective to write a crawler or use a scraping tool. So if it's in a handful of sources, you probably want near 100% coverage and zero latency, and you don't mind doing anything. And it's quite easy to write a crawler today. There are many cool tools and open source libraries that you can use to write a crawler. So as a developer, if you want to scrape CNN or any specific website that not necessarily allows you to crawl him and you wanted to do it privately, use a scraping tool, use your own software. WebHost solves the scale problem when you want to access hundreds of thousands of websites and have access to a unified format and clean format. If you go to that scale, building it on your own is, I would say, like your self-developer, probably impossible. But even as a company, it's based on over 10 years of development and tens of thousands of human of development efforts. And we have a huge database going back to 2008. So that probably pages that you don't have access anymore, but they're offline.
Mm-hmm.
So having access to a huge amount of websites and data, that's where WebHost come to play. It's not for a specific website. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that we changed the model, because when we got clients, smaller clients onboarding who wanted only little amount of data, they weren't happy and we weren't happy because they need a lot of support. Why you miss that? Why this site does not exist, etc., etc. And so we invested a lot of effort in support, and they weren't happy because they didn't get a 100% zero latency they expected. So lose-lose situation. As the bigger the company, the bigger the requirement for content, the better fit Weber's is. So it's more of a, again, like the Google, you want huge amount of data and you don't want to handpick a specific source.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually, a little while ago, I was using the WebHost API, and this I think maybe like a perfect example of what I mean by what you mean by scale is I was searching up different documents on different topics to then feed it into IBM Project Debater and generate some debate speeches. Which, by the way, everybody, you will be able to take a look at those debate speeches. I'll be putting a link in the live chat shortly, where you can go ahead and take a look at them. And the way that Project Debater works is essentially you give it lots and lots of different sentences about a certain topic, and as well as a certain debate motion, and it'll go ahead and choose the sentences that contain claims and evidence and arguments and automatically structure them into a debate speech with key points and so on. It's a really interesting piece of technology, but again, one of the big issues is how do you get the data to feed into Project Debater, because it needs millions of sentences. And the reason for that is because if you just grab a couple of sentences from a news article, for example, they're probably not structured in the way you would want a debate speech to be structured, right? Only maybe one sentence out of 2,000 would really be structured like an individual standalone claim that doesn't rely on more context, right? And so I had, for example, let's just say capitalism, right? The random topic, searched that up on WebHost, got back, 40,000 results, and from those extracted 2.5 million sentences, out of which, after all of the filtering and narrowing down by Project Debater, we were left with 900 claims. So we really need scale in that instance. And this is still relatively very small scale compared to what I'm sure a lot of clients at WebHost need, right? This is nothing compared to what real clients at WebHost would require. But still, even for this, right, 2.5 million as a developer using Project Debater, bringing that down to just 900. Anything lower than that simply wouldn't have worked. We wouldn't have gotten quality speeches, right? And so scale really is important. And again, there's just all that hassle of how do you even build something to get data from 2008 back historically from the internet, right? That's the thing about the internet. It's constantly evolving. It's not just a static thing that you can query. It's always changing. And so those are all the challenges.
But mentioning that you need to be also agnostic about the data that we collect, because you had one use case and we serve hundreds of clients with multiple use cases, and each one of them could search in multiple languages and different use cases. So we can't go and build or specialize on certain type of websites, because you would search for capitalism, another one will search around medicine name or a political entity or whatever, and each and every one wants those millions of sentences or hundreds of thousands of results. So we need to be as wide net as possible, and then have it laid out for the client to filter against. And then you have to offer We have dozens of filters to pinpoint and better get your data set in order. So as time went by, we added more and more filters to help our
Hmm.
clients pinpoint the data set, because with lots of data could be also lots of mess. And question, who is cleaning the data, who's
Hmm.
doing the work, is also a question that we also inside a company debate. How much analytics should we put on top of the data,
Hmm.
and how much should we focus on the collection? So that's
Right.
also a difficult question to answer.
Right, and I mean, I gotta say, as a developer at heart, one of the things that I just impulsively do is, whenever I'm seeing something that in some ways powered by technology, there's always that little thought in the back of my mind going, how would they have implemented this, right? And whether it's something super simple or even something really complex, there's always that thing in the back of my mind going, how would they have implemented this? There's been many times where there'll be a bug in some kind of software, and you'll just kind of instinctively know what went behind that software, how it was architected to lead up to a bug like that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll be seeing a movie, and I'll just be thinking in the back of my head, amazed at how they use neural networks to map facial expressions to CGI characters and how they're interacting with real world characters and all these things, right? And WebHost is also similarly one of those tools where, as a developer, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, that is so incredible that you can do that, right? That you can take something as open domain as the internet, literally just the internet, and catalog it in a way where I can say, I want 40,000 documents on capitalism, and just you have it, right? So that's incredible to really think about. So actually, now that we're on that topic of just the sheer scale of the kind of data that we need to gather, what are some of those unique challenges that you face from a technical perspective when you actually do need to do that cataloging of the internet since 2008? What are those unique technical challenges in storing the data, collecting it, querying it when you actually get some sort of query? How exactly have you been working towards solving these challenges?
Okay, so initially we started with well, back in the days it was Lucene and then Elastic. And we started initially managing Lucene on our own, which was a pain. And then Elastic came, thank God. And historically, and even currently, we save our data in our own servers. We don't use the cloud
Mm-hmm.
yet. We keep on thinking about it and we are testing, but we are used to it, and it's immensely cost effective for us, at least, because we are using all the resources all the time. Crawlers 100% of the time, and Elastic. So for cloud infrastructure to make sense, there's no kind of way of us sharing resources. We need everything for our cluster.
Mm-hmm.
But they're putting on the effort, so we might move. It'd be easier. We currently have a cluster of about 60 servers,
Mm-hmm.
only for the live data. 30 days on the open web and 2 years on the dark web, which is a whole different story, which had to, bring results in a fraction of a second, and search again, either search 30 days or 2 years of data. So the main infrastructure is Boolean, is Elasticsearch that supports Boolean text analysis. And we have, of course, the challenges are to maintain servers that are going down and replace them, and making sure we keep on with the load and adding more clients. But that's kind of a solved problem because of Elasticsearch. So it's just optimizing the updating and the indexing of the content. The main issue was with the archive, which was, interestingly enough, every client asked about, do you guys have an archive? And we didn't, because it's very expensive to search on a huge amount of data and bring back results quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And when we tried, and I tried to calculate how much would it cost me to hold like huge amount of data, we're not talking only about news or blogs, the message boards. is huge. It's millions, tens or tens of millions of posts a day, but you need to try to index hundreds of millions of them because of the deduplication.
Hmm.
And we have about 6 terabytes of data only for the 30 days
Wow.
yeah, cluster. So going back 5 years, 10 years, that would cost a lot. And so I asked the client, how much would you willing and try to understand how much will they be willing to pay for access to an archive data? Not a lot. But it was important, but no one was willing to pay. So eventually the architecture was changed because archive data extraction is kind of a one-time situation. You
Hmm.
may have a query, but you may want it like in different time span, but it's kind of a backfill approach. Just to download a data set, and then on the live API, you want it continuously get updated information.
Hmm.
So instant result wasn't a priority. So what we did was kind of an elastic solution on top of a storage unit. So it's over 60 terabytes of data on Elastic that we open indexes and close them. And a query could take, depending on the complexity of the query and the time frame, data source that you choose could take between a few minutes to a few days to eventually return back. So it's asynchronic. You run, there's an API, but also interface, and you can ping it and get notified when the extraction is ready.
Hmm.
So that was a solution to enable much cheaper access to data that is queryable and still goes back 10 years. That was challenge solved.
Right. So I feel like what's really nice about that situation, it really shows off how you can optimize a certain situation based off of the parameters that you have, right? So like for
Yeah.
example, for like 30 days worth of web data, maybe having instant results is important. So it makes sense to have, obviously a great storage architecture, but then also really fast compute and a cluster of, servers just dedicated to searching, right? But
Yeah.
then when you have this historical archive, you start to realize the use cases for this technology call for an API that doesn't necessarily need to return results instantly, right? As long as it
Right.
can give you a lot of the data that you're requesting for, and so that that makes a lot of sense as to scale down a little bit on the speed of the search in order to enable 60 terabytes and growing, of course, of this data. What's amazing to me is that this is the internet, so this is never going to get smaller. This is only going to continue to get bigger, and that is, a huge technical challenge. You have to think about it, 60 terabytes, but it's not getting smaller. It's only getting bigger every single day. So,
No, when we improve our crawling capabilities, so
mhm.
every year we are increasing our coverage and latency, and so every year we save more than past year. So every time we think we reach a good place, we never tired of trying to be more efficient. So we keep on putting into the archive more data than the year before.
Right.
So yeah,
That's
it's not
incredible.
getting cheaper.
Well, only getting more expensive, right? And
Yeah.
speaking of use cases, I do want to ask you a little bit more about some use cases for WebHost, but really quickly, I do want to start off with a question from the live stream. This is from Hamad Siddiqui, and I think you're actually very well positioned to answer this question because your career has spanned so many years of working on so many different kinds of technology, and you're still a developer at heart, right? So you know how it is to need to change very quickly and be agile, right? Agile is kind of like an overused word quite a bit, but still at its core, it has some truth to it. Of you need to move quickly within the world of technology. And Hamad's asking that the more he's getting to know about, for example, deep learning technology, he realized how fast the industry is running, and every day you see new services and tools, and he fears that whatever he's studying is going to be outdated very soon. So he asks, what do you suggest one should do to make sure that they keep up to the pace of the industry, and what should one learn that will always be in demand? And what do you think is the most promising future technology in this domain? So, sort of three questions there, but let's start off with the first one. What should someone do to keep up to the pace of the industry?
I tell you the truth, I never thought of this way. I always thought about what will solve a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really care about in sense about the industry. I don't look back. I don't look. I look at the problem. I try to solve the problem. I remember posting on Stack Overflow an answer about how to parse the page and saying that we use regular expressions to parse the page. And I got a lot of hate for that because the way of parsing a page is using, the DOM. And you can't, you're crazy doing regular expression. It's expensive and it's not efficient. And there's a reason we use regular expression. Just so if you're using the DOM, it can break very easily if you want to extract the structure. If you're using regular expansion, maybe it's more expensive, but it serves the problem of not breaking every time the developer changes an element on the page. So I looked at the solution, not necessarily about the right way of doing things. It's about the right way of doing things for the right, for solving the problem. And I can tell you, my VP R&D and I always talk about it, that we have a lot of old technologies that that work well and do what they're intended to do in order to solve the problem. So um, what I would do is see and look at a problem and investigate the right tool, the most efficient tool for the job. And many times it's not a whole story, either efficiency or solving the problem. It's the execution about how we go and remove frictions and make it user friendly and accessible and many other parameters rather than the technology. Um, so I know as a technologist, it's many times about the coolness of technology, but there are other aspects. Now, when I move to the business side, I also look at solving problems the same way. So there's a problem, I need to solve it in a more efficient way and look at the value proposition that I will bring to the table, not necessarily the coolest and the hypest tech out there.
Mhm. I love that hybrid technologist entrepreneurial mindset, right? It's sort of like, in between with the idea of course it's always interesting to look at cool new technologies, but at the same time, your focus as an entrepreneur, someone who's trying to solve problems, should be exactly that, finding the problems and figuring out what sets of technology would be useful for solving them. And if I were to sort of take a look at particularly the point that you brought up, Hamad, about education, and actually you're just getting into the world of deep learning, right? Like what can you do to keep up to the pace of the industry? What I think is important to keep in mind is that when you enter into the world of technology, once you start working with tech, it only becomes easier to pick up more tech, right? And that's because everything builds on top of some kind of foundation that already exists. And especially, within the world of like AI machine learning, I feel like one of my friends, he put this best. A little while ago, I was debating on, should I be buying an NVIDIA GPU right now? They're going to release a new one soon. Same thing with the M1 Max. And what they said to me was, there's always going to be something new. And when you buy something, when there's a new version or a better version of it out, or something even entirely new, it's not like yours is any worse. Right? Yours is still as good as it was when you bought it. There just happens to be a better one now too. Right? And so it's the same thing with the world of deep learning. If you learn TensorFlow today, but then there's a PyTorch tomorrow, it's not like TensorFlow is useless. Right? You still have that TensorFlow skill. If anything, it's now actually pretty easy for you to go to PyTorch and say, hey, I already know how automatic differentiation works. I know how graph building works. I know how CUDA kernels work. Let me take this knowledge and extrapolate it to quickly learn PyTorch. Right? That's the agility that you're afforded within the world of technology when you understand something at a basic level. So I feel like that's, sort of bridging that gap. Of course, you always want to be focused on solving problems, and of course, cool new technologies just happen to be, in some cases, the best ways to solve problems. And so that's something to keep in mind.
I had a partner who was a developer at heart, and every time he built something, once it was done, he wanted to refactor it. Refactoring, I think, is the most fun part for developer. I created something, now it's ugly, I want to create it again. Yeah, and then you stay at one place, you don't move forward, and it's important to, it's not about necessarily just learning the technology, is using it
Mm-hmm.
correctly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. It's I gotta say refactoring is fun.
I knew. Yeah.
Right. Another, some very, intense debate that a lot of that I have with one of my friends is the importance of clean code. I personally am a believer in making sure that your code is clean, because if you have code that works but it isn't clean, I think that is less valuable than having code that kind of doesn't work but is very clean, because when things change, it's easier to change what you have that is clean.
Right.
Something's
Hmm.
not clean, you're gonna start from scratch, right?
Sure.
It doesn't really make sense to do that. I cannot count, probably on the two hands that I have, how many times someone's reached out to me with a bug that could have been solved simply by just running the code through a linter.
Hmm.
Like, not even like an overall architecture change or anything, just running the code through a linter would have helped you immediately solve that bug, right? You put the brace too far off, and you cut off the little iterator in the while loop, something simple like that. But yeah, no, that's generally what I think. Hopefully that was helpful for you, Hamad. And also another question, Rand, maybe you can shed some light on this. Ahmad's asking, what do you think is the most promising future technology in this domain? So I believe Ahmad is talking about like deep learning and AI. I'm not sure if that's something that you particularly specialize in, but any ideas on like some promising future technologies in that domain?
I don't feel like I'm equipped to really answer this question. I'm more on the collection part. AI, again, as you said yourself, it's moving really fast. I try to keep up, but I can't say I'm close to an authority to speak about it.
No, that makes total sense. But again, do feel free, Hamad, to take a look at the other like artificial intelligence focused episodes we've done with, like, for example, Sriram and Ruchir from IBM Research. I do believe that would be helpful, so I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the description. Hopefully that's helpful. Right, so now, as I was saying before this, I do want to get a little bit deeper into some of the use cases for for WebHose, and some of the things that you're actually doing with it. I mean, I used it for Project Debater. I've used it for natural language question answering. I've used it for understanding, market data. But I want to understand from you now, what are some of the things that your clients are actually doing and actually, leveraging WebHost for? What are some of the problems that we're able to solve by accessing web data at scale? Because I know that, it sounds useful, but what are some of the problems that we're actually solving using this data?
So we started off as again, I came from a brand monitoring company,
Mm-hmm.
so that was the instant market that I cater to, and most of the brand monitoring companies are using WebHost to tap into news, blog discussions, reviews data, to monitor either what are news saying about a certain company or what people are saying about a certain company, product, event. Just tapping into web content for alerts, for analysis. So it's basically for the marketing industry. Those companies are having dashboards, do sentiment analysis on top of the data, give you alerts, give you a way to research certain topic. Basically, kind of a Google infrastructure. So each and one of them have their own search engine and analysis on top of the data, and they need a constant feed, either a firehose, which is all of our data,
Mm-hmm.
or filtered by topics, by keywords that they tap into specific data set they want to analyze later on. So that's huge amount of clients that we have. And then for the small one, we have risk companies that want to, and again, risk, also the cyber or digital risk protection, but I'll get to that in a second. Risk are know your customer, KYC, or risk for knowing if there are any problems with companies or with executives, or if there was a merger that may affect the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to monitor as much as possible. If there was a fire in a plant somewhere distant and someone talked about it in a forum before it went to the news, so they want to everything that they can do about either parts, about name of products, the name of companies, subsidiaries, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
just to know if there's a risk for something. And they may use the live data, but also try to jot up a score by using the archive. For example, how many times a certain building was mentioned alongside with arsonery, fire, theft, just to build an idea about this
Mm-hmm.
particular building or area. and try to make a score. That's one of the parameters that they're using.
Hmm.
So that's the risk. Of course, NLP to train languages. Languages keep changing, and they want
Yeah.
to keep to be updated with the latest, build their own models, and make sure new terms that are taking into account when they train their model for sentiment analysis or topic recognition or category development, whatever use case in that field.
Hmm.
Financial. So financial again. So it could be news, as simple as finding news about a company,
Hmm.
but also quant hedge funds who would like to try to predict the future in a sense. And the way they do that, they uh, have access to the archive. And now, once you have access to the archive and to events that actually happened, you can try to correlate past event before if a commodity went up or down. Now you have kind of a playground of knowing what happened in the media or on the message boards or blogs or reviews before, and try to see if you can correlate that with the event that eventually happened. So you
Hmm.
extract entities, you extract the relationship, the sentiment, whatever vector you can create, and then you try to correlate to the event. Once you find it, you try to then reproduce this in in the present, and then have a score again to try to predict a certain movement in a commodity.
Hmm.
So that's a very sophisticated hedge fundy approach that not many companies are able to do. It's very difficult
Hmm.
because the data, unlike other alternative data, which is very specific, very structured numbers, which are very, very, very real and understandable. Analyzing text and extracting value out of text is not as simple as getting table data, tabular data, and using it. And then we go to a whole different playground, which is the cybersecurity or DRP, digital risk protection.
Hmm.
That is our dark web data, which is more for fraud, for law enforcement agencies, for companies that want to see if there are breached or attacks are being planned or are going on their infrastructure or product. It is fraud, either on the products or abuse, or they're being sold on the dark web, or credit cards are being sold, or many types of use cases from the darkest part of the law enforcement to the more of a brand protection type of. We hear about database leaks every day. We hear
Hmm.
about malware and companies that are being hacked. Many companies need their ears in those chat application, message boards, marketplaces to know if they are being uh, either attacked, their data is being sold, or something is being planned.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a more difficult place to collect information from and to pinpoint the information. Unlike the open web, where you can find, search for Dell laptops, find
Yeah.
relevant information about Dell laptops. Searching for fraud or hacking or weapons on dark web, it's a whole different level of skill set that we help a couple of clients, but we had to also to train machine learning categorizer to help our clients search in data set of, again, if it's about hacking, but about terror, about weapons, about pornography or whatever. So it will be easier for them to find the context
Hmm.
of where their brand or subsidiaries or products were mentioned. So that was a whole different challenge.
Right, and it's really just fascinating to think about the fact that not only are we able to catalog the web, but even dark web, and sort of getting into the place where it's hard to even find an index of what's available on the network, right? And I definitely want to get a little bit deeper into that. And also, you touched upon the fact that it's much harder to be able to extract insights within text data than it is tabular data, for example. And before I get deeper into that, there is something that I want to start off by asking because as you were sort of talking about these use cases, something came to my mind. which was that the internet would be almost unusable for humans if we didn't have something like Google to help us, right? And the reason for that is just because there's too much, right? How do you know where to go to get answers, right? Like if I'm asking for something oddly specific, like how can a I don't know, Canadian citizen living in the US get a visa to enter Brazil, right? There's so many parameters there. There's such a specific thing I want to know. And how exactly would I know, hey, do I go to a US or Canadian or Brazilian government website? And when I go there, where do I go on their website? Like Google helps you instantly get answers. And the key secret sauce to Google, the reason people use it over like a Bing or a DuckDuckGo, is precisely because they have really good relevancy ranking. Like they have the best relevancy ranking, and that's just why people like to use Google, right? And also just kind of because we're used to it at this point. But still, right? It's because people love that relevancy, and without that, you'd be scrolling through pages and pages of just links to find what you're looking for. Now, humans aren't computers, so we obviously, when you search up like Tanmay Bakshi on Google, it's going to give you like 4 million results. You're not going to go through 4 million to find what you're looking for. You want what you're looking for at the top. But as a computer, you don't really care what order things are in necessarily. Again, it depends heavily on the use case. But in a lot of cases, like for example, what I was doing with Project Debater, didn't matter what order the articles were in, all of the sentences were going to be analyzed anyway. And so what I want to ask you is, was one of the optimizations you were able to make versus something like what Google would have to do is sort of not needing to focus as much on scoring relevancy through natural language, or is that something that actually is important to some of your clients? And if so, what's your approach to ranking relevancy?
Yeah, so I initially did not want to do any relevancy option because it's web hose. It's kind of a hose for the web. So as fast as we find it, you'll get it, and then you'll fill out your own pool of data and do whatever you want with it. That's the basic idea. So the default sort order is by crawl date. As soon as you get it, so eventually, as you paginate the default 3 days, and you paginate up until the present. And then every interval, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, 1 minute, 1 hour, you're gonna paginate again to the present. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the default, and that's the correct way of using Windows. However, there are many clients that wanted to use WebHost as a search engine,
Mm-hmm.
and they use it, without any relevancy. And if I was a client, I would be disappointed, like as a human looking at the results, because it takes a lot of filters to start getting relevance. For example, I want only news. I want only from the article, and not the comment to a news. Because by default, we'll return back a comment to a news article. And if you want news articles about a certain topics, we will return everything related. So you need to, first of all, specify you want only news, and then
Mm-hmm.
specify that you want only the articles. And then maybe you want to specify that you want it only from the top 10,000 news sources or Alexa rank. And then you
Mm-hmm.
want to specify you want only in English. And then to increase relevancy, maybe in the title. So you have to do a lot of work to create kind of a relevant data set. Eventually, we did add a relevancy just to get them off our back. But we did it Elasticsearch relevancy. It's a TF-IDF kind of relevancy, which is very good. It's not good at all, but it is better than by the crawl date.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, recently, because WebHost is used, we have clients coming in and use WebHost, or do want to use WebHost as a search engine, basically, for news. I'm talking specifically for news. We created a sub-vertical for the news. We called it ENA, Enriched News API, which serve two purposes. One is relevant. So we take into account lots of factors, social signals, how many times it was liked and shared on social media, where the keyword were in the URL and the title, the text, where in the text, and many other factors to bring back the time frame. You search for the past 24 hours, past 3 days. So many factors into providing you a relevant result, not Google relevant, but it's more of an interesting relevant because of the shares and likes. But it is, bring a much better experience for humans if they want to embed the search result into their own system. So it comes serve a specific type of use case when I want to plug and play a data feed into my own application. And we also enriched it with a lot of NLP. So lots of categories, entity level, sentiment, ticker level. So a lot of the work that needs to be done afterwards, we also added it, and you also able to filter by these entities. So this is kind of a new feature. We're still examining how it is being accepted by the market, but it came after we saw multiple tries to use WebHost as a search engine, and then we came to the conclusion it would be nice to offer a solution for that problem as well.
And I mean, speaking of enrichments, this is something that I'm very interested in, of course, because the world of artificial intelligence ties into this, right? And in particular, something that I'm sort of fascinated by is that, like Watson Discovery, for example, which I do believe WebHost powers the Watson Discovery news collection. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful, right? So Watson Discovery, anybody, when you use Watson Discovery and you see like the news collection, the data behind that is actually coming from WebHost. And what really fascinates me is that, of course, Watson Discovery has all these different enrichments that they add. They have like sentiment, they have entities, they have categories, they have all these different things that help you understand how relevant something can be to a certain topic and create like this sort of knowledge graph of things that we know about the world. But the thing about WebHost is, maybe actually a great analogy would be Intel, right? What was one of the reasons Apple switched from Intel to Apple Silicon, right? It's because they wanted to have more specialized chips for their computers particularly, right? Intel has to create CPUs for everybody, so they don't nearly have as much of an ability to say, all right, let's develop this CPU with this specific feature to work with these specific other pieces of hardware on Apple devices, right? Because they don't necessarily have that kind of leeway. Everything they add goes to everybody. And so what I want to know is that, WebHose sort of serves a different market than a Watson Discovery News or a Google, in the sense of WebHose is for all the different clients that want to extract data from the web. Whereas, Watson Discovery News, obviously they're interested very particularly in news, and they probably want those enrichments, otherwise they'd be going to WebHose. Or, though, if you're Google and you're just, you want an instant relevant result in the top, right? And so that sort of brings me to the point of, going into a bit more detail on enrichments. What kind of enrichments do you think or have you started to take a look at that you believe are actually worth adding to the WebHose database, where it's actually worth using all of that extra storage and the compute necessary to calculate those enrichments because enough of your clients are actually using them? So which ones do you think those would be?
Funny part is that we spoke with some of the clients, and on the regular web host and news blog discussions, not the ENA, we use an open source solution, the Stanford NLP, to extract the entities.
Mm-hmm.
Simple enough, works fine, but it's not the best solution out
Yeah.
there. But funny enough, many of our clients are using it. They're fairly happy with it. Why? Because they don't, and it comes to the same point that you said about the amount of data. They want it for aggregation. So they want it structured outside, and then they can count. Every time I mention Microsoft, what companies or persons are mentioned along Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, if I would need to do, I would need to index and enrich. This way, once I get this information from WebHost, I can just index it, and I don't mind even the text. The fact that I have the enrichment or the enriched entities, even sentiment, I can just query about the aggregation. So the fact that Stanford NLP have a recall that caused a miss of 30% of dimensions of Microsoft doesn't really matter, because if I have millions of documents, I will get a statistically well-defined amount of companies or persons mentioned along, so I can create kind of a vector of data that they can then use to train or to understand a correlation between companies, correlation between people or location, because I have this structure. But when we created INA, the enriched, we are actually using now a third-party provider, and we support hundreds of thousands of entities and the sentiment for them in higher range of sentiment. And basically, the reason, again, it's not our, that's the question, where do we stop in the analysis and the collection? That's why we didn't invest in the technology, we use a third party. Uh, but we kind of went ahead and added everything that this company had. So it's category level, article level category, or entity level category, and the Wikipedia pages linked, and the sentiment, the level of sentiment, and ticker of the company, and anything that we found that the API could offer was added. By the way, Watson is going to add, I don't know, another feature coming that you'll be able to create your own models and very, very cool AI on top of the data, much better than the current Watson version has. So it's very excited. Gives you much more lenience about what you can do with the data for very, very specific, very broad use cases. But what we offered is kind of the commodity of entity level extraction, entity level sentiment, categories, site level and article level category. Again, IPTC, IAB category. So everything that's possible. But again, that can many providers or even open source libraries currently have this ability. So it's amazing. When we started, it was kind of Stanford NLP was kind of the best thing. Now you have so many. You have TensorFlow. We have so many open source libraries that can provide you. It's very CPU intensive, of course, but you can really enrich quite easily your data. But we try to save that to our clients with Ina.
Right. So again, it really depends on the use case, but it's interesting to hear because I feel like humans have trouble comprehending the sheer scale of some data sets. Kind of like how it's next to impossible, and it really is impossible for the human mind to fully grasp the scale of the Earth and the solar system and the galaxy, right? It's fundamentally impossible for our primate brains to really understand just how large things are in the universe. Similarly, it can be hard to understand just how just how incredible even relatively naive analysis can be when you have a lot of data. And I feel like two pieces of research really point to why exactly this makes a lot of sense. One of them is a system called Ask MSR, so Ask Microsoft Research, which is what Ask Tanmay was based off of. Ask MSR was, the premise was actually very simple. You have a question. We already have search engines. Search engines don't extract answers yet, at least back then they didn't. And so can we just search up a question online, grab all of the different results, like the little descriptions that Google gives you, for example, and can we just extract all the entities and see which entity of the correct type shows up most often and see if that's the correct answer? And they found that in a vast majority of cases, it actually was the correct answer in lots of large databases. Similarly, if you take a look at the Watson that played Jeopardy, back when I was a kid, so back when I was 12, I was reading through those papers and I was like, this is amazing stuff. But the one thing that used to always really, really annoy me is how, for example, Watson Jeopardy had this thing called Prismatic, where they would put together triplets of information, like for example, Abraham Lincoln, President, United States, right? So they could put together triplets of information like this. But what really annoyed me was how individual entities would have multiple triplets based off of how they were referenced, right? Like Abraham Lincoln, President, United States, Lincoln, President, United States, Abraham Lincoln, President, U.S. And there would be some level of trying to disambiguate the entities and merge triplets, but it wouldn't go all the way, and that really annoyed me. It's like, how do you deal with a system like that, right? Like that kept me up at night. And so, eventually I learned to realize that at large scales, that doesn't matter, right? Because if you have tens of millions of articles and you have hundreds of millions of triplets, and when you get a Jeopardy clue, if you're looking at all of those triplets, eventually it doesn't really matter that there are lots of duplicates if they all sort of help you achieve what it is you're trying to achieve. Right, and that's something that I think is sort of important to realize is that because we don't just deal with data at that large of a scale on a daily basis, it can be hard to understand what kinds of new patterns can emerge just from the sheer scale of it. Right,
Yeah.
like sort of ties back. If anyone joining today is a fan of deep learning technology, this ties into deep learning's deep double descent issue, I believe it's called, where like for example, lots of layers in your deep neural networks. At first, it's going to help, then it's going to not help, and your network's going to get worse. But then all of a sudden, there's a point where that flips back around, and suddenly it starts helping again. Right? Same thing with amount of data. More and more data helps. Suddenly you get to a point where more data doesn't help your network, but then suddenly you reach another tipping point where more data actually continues to help your network. Right? It's sort of, we have that weird issue within the world of deep learning. Same thing with scale. Right? It's hard to understand the patterns that emerge in data just because of how much of it we have. So that's definitely something that I'm sure WebHost can help people
Imagine the
realize.
problem you have with Google when you search for a topic and you get a first result, and you make up your opinion based on that
Yeah.
result, and that's it. And many times Google will be an echo chamber.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're for political debates, if you're right wing or left wing, you'll probably get a result you're thinking are the correct one. You make your mind could be result in fake news. If you have computers who get scale amount of data, then they can probably get a better understanding by taking into account a huge amount of data and not this anecdote of a small website that you got on the first or second result at Google, because Google knows you and know you talked about relevancy will bring back results that will strengthen your already beliefs. So once you have this a huge amount of data, you have a better chance of reaching a truth rather than humans who make up their mind by the first result, the
Yeah.
first title they see. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it that opens up the whole sort of can of worms of, the ethics of Google, providing answers instead of just information and so much more. Like, I mean, as you mentioned, relevancy, right? Like Google's obviously tracking the things that you click, and in some cases it can be totally innocent. Like they know that when you search up computers, you only like to search up Linux or Mac computers. You don't like Windows, so it's not gonna start ranking Windows results lower now, right? It understands some basic preferences about you, even if they're not hard coded. These are things that they just sort of learn over time with like say deep learning. But at the same time, that can be very malicious, not necessarily malicious on Google's end. Not going to get into that debate, but at the same time, that can be harmful in the sense of then it's going to start ranking the relevancy of, as you mentioned, for example, your political news, right? So if you search up something about a debate, maybe Google's going to say, hey, you're left wing. Let's pop up like CNN on the top of your feed because this is the one you likely click on, right? Or the other way around. So it sort of ties into the whole sort of ethics of ranking web content in the first place, and how do you make sure you're not doing that unfairly, but that you are still providing access to this content, because there's so much on the internet, we need some kind of way to rank it.
right.
How do we do that to keep things fair and not put people into echo chambers? That's a huge issue, not something we can solve in a single Tech Life Skill session. Maybe next time, but
Join us next time when we solve.
yes. That's wonderful. I can't wait. But yeah, actually, speaking of the future, I want to know, what does your future roadmap look like? So I know that you're working on all kinds of interesting technologies and different things. We've talked about enrichments, we've talked about all kinds of stuff. But what else are you working on for the future of WebHose? I feel like on a surface level, for someone that isn't very well informed, it could just look like, hey, all you do is catalog web data. You're just going to keep cataloging web data. But like, what else are you doing to continue to make it more relevant, more useful, add more features? What are you doing? What are you thinking of?
So there are the three pillars that we keep on improving. It's coverage, quality, and latency.
Mm-hmm.
So the two of which are usually more important are coverage and latency. So clients would like to get the data as soon as it's being published. And that's a challenge because we don't want to hammer websites too often. We'll get blocked. By the way, WebHose is using the user agent and fixed IPs. So a website knows that we crawl it, and we're not Google. So if we're bad, they will block us, and we will abide by this blocking. So we won't be able to crawl this website anymore,
Mhm.
which is bad for everyone. But I can understand, like if I'm hammering a website and doesn't see value, then he will block our crawlers.
Mhm.
So we need to be very smart about how we crawl
Mhm.
websites. And we keep on working, and we are in the process of releasing a new version of our crawler who using statistics to know when a site is active, when a site section is active actually. So a site can make up many sections, and some of them could be active in certain time of the day, other times of the day, peaks, etc. So he learns the website and trains the crawler specifically on those time frames and make the latency and therefore also the coverage better. So increasing the coverage, increasing our latency and the quality when we extract the content. We have multiple ways of extracting the content. One is that we create a parser for this website. Another one is a kind of a heuristic way or a generic way. And when you use heuristics and generics, it's the accuracy goes down. So we want to improve on that. We keep on improving on that, and our ability to automatically detect the right content on more websites. We get requests from clients all the time. We have an auto discovery mechanism that finds more websites all the time. So we want not every website that we find our system, because we need to structure it and clean it and unify it. We need to detect the structure of the website. So it's not possible for every website we find. So that's something we work on improving as well. So the more website we find, larger chunk of it, we're able to add to our crawling cycle. So that's the three pillars. That's something that we're constantly working on improving. I told you that every year we crawl more. That's one of the reasons, because we improve on that, and that's very important to our clients to keep on being, the best at what we do. But we also want to add more verticals.
Mhm.
So we are examining new types of verticals that will benefit our clients or new market at all. Could be on the risk, could be on the e-commerce. Again, because we were bootstrapped, we don't have the luxury to shoot everywhere. We want to really examine the market and to see where is the best value that we can bring, something that doesn't exist or doesn't exist well, doesn't solve the problem well,
Mhm.
or we can offer. Of course, on the dark web or the cyber, we keep on adding new networks and capabilities, and that's something that always evolves. It's kind of new, and we learn this topic every day, and our clients are learning this topic every day. So lots of exciting either data points and optimization on the current data that we collect.
Right, I'm sure there's going to be so much more exciting stuff for
Yeah.
WebHost in the future, right? It's honestly such a little it's such a fascinating tool to me as a developer to be able to finally get access to the web, right? Because the internet's so great for humans, why not make it great for computers as well? And I feel like that's necessary now, right? With the kinds of analysis that we need to run, with the kinds of technology that we have now, we can now begin to understand unstructured data at scale. And if there's no way for us to actually tap into the unstructured data, then what's the point of having the analysis algorithms in the first place? And the internet is by far the largest place to get unstructured data. Unstructured data that's agnostic to what you might have, right? Like, for example, if you're looking for feedback on a certain product, maybe if you look for feedback on your website, that's going to be biased by the customers that are going to your website and leaving reviews, but just looking on the internet in general, taking a look at Reddit, other message boards, taking a look at social media, right, through a place like WebHost, that can help you understand more about how people are perceiving your brand, the pros and the cons. And there's just so much that you can do with the internet that you can't do with a specific closed domain scraping or crawling of a certain place, or even just collection, right? So I feel like there's so much value to this, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. As a matter of fact, what I'd love to do now is, of course, ask you, based off of how we've sort of where this conversation's gone today. We've talked to a couple of folks in the audience. What would you say is sort of your closing message for everybody joining today, and what would you like to leave them with?
Yeah, I think what we discussed is focused on on solving the problem or asking why. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And if you answer that, I believe that you'll get to the right solution and you will get rid out of the noise because there's so much noise when you're doing something. Whirlwind is always pushing you aside and changing direction, and you need to stay focused on the value proposition that you bring either to your uh, day job, or company, or whatever you study. Why are you studying whatever you're studying? What's the reason you got into it? And I think that will be a way of leading you forward.
Absolutely. So being focused on your value proposition, understanding why it is that you do something, and always working towards improving that North Star metric, as my friend Tim likes to say. Right. So thank you very much for sharing this wisdom with us today, Ran. It was great having you on the show. Great learning more about the world of WebHost, the other amazing stuff you've been working on. Again, artificial intelligence is great. There's all these different technologies. I feel like AI is the one that gets the most attention. But all these different technologies that can be made really possible, that we can really start to extract value from if we have access to data. That's always been a central theme on TechLifeSkills is data. And so WebHost is just one of those leaders at the forefront, really providing access to that data in the first place. So once again, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And of course, thank you very much everybody for joining today. Make sure you join us next week. As a matter of fact, we actually have 2 TechLifeSkills episodes planned. One on Wednesday and one on Sunday. It's going to be a surprise on Wednesday. I'll give you a hint. It's going to be a very much developer-focused episode. We're going to be taking a look at some actual code. We're going to be building some applications. So make sure you join us. And we will be joined by a very special guest. And he's passionate about the world of development and coding. One of the best developers I know, actually. So make sure you join us, and it's going to be a really fun episode, I'm sure. And of course, on Sunday, we're going to get to hear from some students and next generation technologists. So make sure you join us. Once again, thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. Thank you, Ran, for being my special guest, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.